Y la gente sabe. ¿Para presentar en español o en inglés? En español. En español. Porque estoy entendiendo español.
All right. Thank you, good afternoon, for joining us in this space for the organization and the universities that have participated in the co-organization. It's really an honor to have you here. I would like to just give two warnings. We're going to have interpretation services, but this roundtable will be in Spanish unless someone indicates that they will make an intervention in another language. Then we could have this service. And the second thing, in case of an earthquake, we just need to keep calm, and we have our exits next to the stairways, so we would like to try an exit with as much calm as possible through the stairs and leave the room. Now, the format for participation will be for 15 minutes. We will use a very discreet buzzer for those additional minutes, allow you to close on the ideas, and this way it's not an abrupt closure. And we really want to thank you for your participation, for your attention, and hopefully this table is very rich in contributions. My name is Ana Gutierrez, and I'm a research professor, and I'll accompany you in our story, and Marcela Villalobos Gonzalez will be co-host along with me. She's also a professor, and we'll try to do justice to your interventions. So this is the input that the scientific committee will have afterwards to evaluate the final communication. We still don't have everyone that will participate on this table, so we are going to offer the four first presentations. We'll do a space for exchange, inquiries, and comments, and then we will continue with the next three presentations that will be pending. Thank you very much. And that will be our serve plate. Hopefully we enjoy the space a lot. And now I'll start presenting Clara Maibos, who is our first participant. She is a doctor in social anthropology of the University of Paris. She is a researcher, works in the CESMA laboratory, and works in the Morphovision travel agency for development of tourism in rural communities and indigenous communities. We really appreciate her participation, and the space is yours. Thank you very much for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to entertain you a little bit because I know that this hour after lunch, you want to kind of have a nap, so we're going to try to do it a little bit more entertaining. And first off, as you can see, the title that I had at the beginning, that is written in the paper that you have, is not the same as the first one, as this one here, because I realized that really there was another contribution with work that I'm performing right now that could be compared to this. So I'm actually going to present today a comparative study between the work of the chronicles that I'll talk about that I did during my doctor's degree in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico with the Mares NGO, and also the work I am performing right now with the Costa Rican travel agency, More Evasions. So I'll start first with presenting the two case studies so you can see why I'm talking about these two things that are very different but have a methodology of collaborative anthropology where we will see some similarities, and then we will do a comparison of those two cases. Moving on to our next slide, case one, Mahahual, Mexico. We are in the Yucatan Peninsula here in Mahahual in the Quintana Roo state, and I did a comparison between 2018 and 2021 for my doctor's degree with the University of Paris in a local NGO called Mares. So Mahahual is a fishing town of the Yucatan Peninsula, but from the beginning of 2000, a cruise dock was built. So this cruise port actually changed everything in the town. The inhabitants changed their occupations from fishermen. They moved on to fishing guides or uh, diving instructors. And on the other hand, we changed the environment entirely, and uh, life life on the sea and on land changed. It's actually a location surrounded by manglers, and we saw a perspective of when this town was built was very different. The other impact from tourism was migrant arrivals. We had for some time natural migrants that moved to Mahahualde to work, to be able to find a better quality of life and having a greater economical benefit. And on the other hand, we had an international migration. This international migration came to Mahahual first to just spend some vacation, typical beach and sun tourism that we found in the Yucatan Peninsula, for example, like Cancun. But reaching the town, they realized that there was the possibility of having or doing an economical investment and open up a business. So now we have a town with a pyramidal social hierarchy town that's very highlighted between national migrants, international migrants, and locals. And that is an issue that belonging to the territory is almost inexistent because there's very few natives, very few people that are native from the areas, as well as with the NGO matters. How do we make the inhabitants want to get involved in the preservation program? How do we work with them if they don't feel that the territory is of their belonging? So here we see some examples. So you can see how Mahahual looks. We have the Berry Reef from Mesoamerica, the town with the main road, and just behind the mangrove that I was mentioning. And around it, we see the tourism attractions and a cruise ship leaving the port. So we leave this question that I made about the belonging to the town, to the territory. Keep that in mind, and we'll look at this more in detail. further on. Now, moving to case number two, this work that I'm currently doing. So all the results, we still don't have them. With the help of the interdisciplinary program of UNA, I had the opportunity, and with my work with the Morpho agency, I had the opportunity to go and get to know the community of La Palma in Playa Blanca. So you understand a little bit more about what I'm doing with this travel agency. We're a travel agency where we focus on having tourism offerings that's more sustainable, more responsible, and how to go about developing tourism in rural areas or indigenous communities, which usually are not that much benefited from tourism. So we're also in a fishing town of a peninsula, in this case, the peninsula of Aosa in Mahawal, that from the beginning of 2000, it's already developed as a tourism town with cruise ships. We still don't have it that much developed here, but they want to develop that because there is a complaint from the inhabitants that all the benefits are going to Drake and Corcovado Bays, and they do have a cultural richness and environmental richness, but people don't really go there. In Mahawal, the problem was that the benefits were going to the cruise ship port and to the company that was actually one from a Mexican person, but that is an international company again. So how do we go about developing tourism in this area, but develop it in a way that on one hand benefits the local communities and on the other hand is sustainable and for the environment and for the inhabitants? So there we have another questions. These two questions. Now we're going to see what type of work could have been done to respond to those two questions. One in the case of Mahahual, and the second one in the case of Playa Blanca. So, during the pandemic in Mahahual, a little bit before actually, I was using a classic methodology of anthropology, so long interviews, uh, participant interviews, but I was always looking for ways of having a more collaborative work with the inhabitants. Sometimes it's complicated because there's work imperatives, social imperatives that also make it, for people usually don't have the time because it's a high season, the tourism season, and people during the season have to work and they don't have time to go and drink a 2 hour coffee with an anthropology student, right? So I took the opportunity of the pandemic and during COVID to say, well, now perhaps we're going to have this time. So some didn't have that time because if we're looking at a case of families that have children, well, it's a specific case that we don't have more time there. But if, for example, we take a migrant from Guadalajara that came when he was 25 years of age and is alone in Mahahual and decided to stay in the town during the pandemic, in those cases we could do something. So I was working with 10 people from the town for several months, and I just asked them to tell me their story during the pandemic, that they would write their story. And the idea was to provide the least possible indications, so it would be as open as possible. But sometimes there's people that do need more subject matter to be able to rate to write. So you have to give them bigger example of their daily life, what you like, what you don't like, how do you see the future of your town, etc. And the idea was afterwards, all of us coming together and doing an analysis amongst ourselves about what happened during the pandemic, what's changed on our vision of our town, to the environment, to the life that we have in this touristic town that is also a fishing area. I'm going to read an extract of one of the chronicles so you see a little bit about the material that I was able to receive. Cruise ships, say the people from town, gave life to Mahahual. But In the pandemic, it seems quite the contrary. Without so much tourism, life proliferates. I don't know if it's just me thinking, but there's the fauna is more willing to come to the town. We see more animals both in the jungle, but as with the areas are near the port, which is a always abundant fishing area, which means that illegal fishermen also come to look for other incomes. Generally, at the time that we come out from the tree that we found a group of fishermen also leaving the water. We shared stories, and they tell us how they caught what they caught and how at what price they're selling it. You cannot deny that some are masters in the art of subaquatic fishing, but uh, they are still illegal. This is a time of uh, efficiency, and we need to survive. But at what price? I really like to fish with harpoon, but I'm always limiting myself and just take a few things. But these guys take over 30 lobsters of all sizes. In this time of pandemic, 18, 20 barracudas, and other very large fish. With all that, I don't know if we can recover the ecosystem that much as we expected without so much tourism. So there in this example, we see the importance that this person from the town puts to the relation between the impact of tourism, their fishing activity, and the environment. And this is what was one of the results that we had of this workshop of Chronicles, of this work that we did over several months. And this was like the result of the reading, the analysis of all the chronicles of one group, where we see particularly that nature, the land are elements that really come out frequently than previously when I did more classical type interviews. It was something that you didn't see that much. These are some pictures of the workshop. Okay, I'm gonna move on a little bit quicker because I just have 5 minutes. Now the project, particularly with the Morpho travel agency that I work with, the idea after a first visit to the community, as a good anthropologist, I work inductive methods. So I came in and I asked myself, well, what are you going to do? What's the project? I tried to explain, but I cannot know because I need the inhabitants to tell me what they want to teach tourists and what they want to do. I cannot come in and say, we're going to set up a project this and that way. That was not the idea. So I invited the population that wanted to come to the project and explained that the idea was to set up a touristic project with them. And there we talked with all of them and talking. Uh, Ideas of a touristic route came up that we could do with the population there. I'm going to tell you a little bit very quickly about the short summary of a lady that was here in this meeting. She told us, before there was no school or electricity here. In 1973, the first school came to the peninsula. In 1996, electricity came. There was only one ad. She bought 200 meters of cable to have electricity brought to her house. So people used candles, and we preserved food with salt and pork with lard. We also cooked with wood, and she actually still cooks with wood. We offer cheap ceviche on the beach, and you wash your clothes on the river. And she would like to offer tourists a workshop to do cocoa sweets at her house with wood oven. So there, speaking with her, we saw that we had that cultural richness that these people and this inhabitant wanted to teach us. So, for example, in this picture, you can see this lady with a small group of tourists grating coconut, learning how to do it. Photograph in the middle, the same thing, speaking with the people from the town. We saw that there was a collection center that was an association that exists for 20 years now, and it's just women that are in charge of that association. So that was also, we're seeing to include that in the circuit. And here's some people on the street that do crafts with clay. And that is how we're starting to build that tour. I take into account the knowledge of each inhabitant from that town. Last slide, and we're done. Now, here we have the analysis of why I was speaking of these two projects with the similarities. In yellow, you can see the points that converge for both projects. So in Mahawal, the project was to write about their life in times of pandemic, to analyze the consequences of COVID-19 on the town life. And in Playa Blanca, it was create a cultural tour with the inhabitants of Playa Blanca. The objectives, which are similar, is to create bonds between the inhabitants. And after the workshop and the work in Mahawal, a lot of the people there were very thankful with the work because they realized that they had neighbors or people that lived next to them and didn't know anything about their lives. And there they had some time of vulnerability where they were able to share their uncertainty during those times. Also, the objective was specifically to realize that the environmental surroundings of their place of living, because when understanding that, we can start build projects for preservation along with the community. And for Playa Blanca, the objective was also to create a touristic product that brings economical benefits directly to the community. For the methodology, so in both we have the collaborative anthropology methodology. Primarily, I was working with Lasseter, the scientist from the United States, and this collaborative anthropology with the inductive method that is basing on what you first see and not coming with your hypothesis before getting to the field of research, but actually to come, take the data, work with the population to afterwards be able to uh, do an analysis for a scientific work or a touristic product for a route with what we're doing in Playa Blanca. Also, in this methodology, it is important to see the role of the researcher in the work. So always, that's something that I try to do as much as possible, seeing how we can go about realizing the power, almost done, of the influence and the power that you have. I am a woman, but I'm French. I come from a rich country. I am in a marginalized country. So how do I position myself when I'm going to work in marginalized communities? How do I have that relationship of dominance and power exist, but how can I work specifically to work with that population and not above them? And then the methodologies, tours with short meetings in Mahawal, which was a long research, and the results, the creation of the 37 chronicles with the 9 inhabitants, and the route created with a group of 7 inhabitants. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. To Clara, we'll continue with Astrid Sanchez Jimenez. The title of her presentation is Equalitarian Climate Solutions Based on Nature for uh, sea, land food systems that are resilient. Astrid is from Costa Rica, from the Sea Life Studies Center in CIMAR and University of Costa Rica. She's a biologist, doctor in socio-ecological maritime systems, and researcher in integrated marine biology that covers quantitative, qualitative research to understand the links between ecological, cultural, and socio-economical components of the um, maritime systems. Welcome, Astrid. Good afternoon. And I see that we moved the title, moved out a little bit. So, resilient marine food systems, that's the name of the presentation, and it's the importance of climate solutions that are equalitarian based on nature. My name is, our friend was saying, is Astrid Sanchez, and this is my postdoctorate project between the University of Costa Rica in University of British Columbia in Canada. So we can start. I will talk as an introduction to what do I mean with marine, food systems, and I'll talk about a case of Nicoya that's just starting the project, so I can tell you some preliminary results there and preliminary recommendations for everything that's coming for the project. Okay, so to start, what are what is blue food? That is a question that may come up. Marine foods are aquatic organisms that could be plants, could be animals. We talked, for example, about fish, mollusks, and seaweed that are recollected in marine environments. And 50% of the fish that is consumed at a worldwide level come from small scale fishing and agriculture at small scale. And two-thirds of that which is consumed worldwide comes from blue food. And they're very important because you might not be able to see it in the presentation, but they represent 20% of the protein, uh, animal protein that is provided to 3,000 million inhabitants worldwide. And it's not only very important, but it also has essential minerals such as calcium, iodine, iron, vitamin B12, vitamin A, amongst others. Blue food is also very important for the rural economy and for the national economy of the countries. They back up the livelihood of small fishermen. And 90% of the work growth in the fishing section at small scales come from this blue food sector. We're talking about 800 million ways of living that come from these sectors. And small scale producers process and distribute most of the food that is destined to human consumption. We see and we understand the systems blue food as part of a greater system, a food system that is complex, social, ecological systems where the interactions between human beings and the ecosystems are key. And there, in this way, when we talk about the human systems, we think about individuals, about a collective of institutions. In terms of ecosystems, we talk about the structure, the health of that ecosystem that allows for those pertaining functions, and there's an interaction between both, where the actions or the interventions from human beings have a direct impact in those ecosystems. It could be through uses like fishing, but also through interventions. It could be reforestation. Would have a positive impact, or you expect that. Deforestation, maybe not that positive. So those type of actions or interventions will also impact the flow of ecosystemic systems, like producing energy, food, climate regulation, water regulation, and recreation. And we're going to understand the systems at Blue Food as a social ecological food system. There are challenges for systems with blue food, maritime blue food. They require effective governance in times like the current ones, where we're facing is a humanity multiple crisis. Climate is one of those. Contamination, problem is social problems. All those confluent in confluence are at an integral level very problematic, and this would allow us what type of incentives are the more appropriate ones in terms of political interventions and management interventions. We need to know, and usually it doesn't happen, the structure of incentives that are behind the decision making for those grants or interventions are the most adequate ones, but that's not the norm. Another challenge is that we need ecosystems that are healthy, a healthy ecosystem, but we know that with climate change, a lot of fish banks are being displaced to colder areas, to areas that are not that warm. There's contamination processes that are also pushing for that species displacement. There's transformation in habitats and reduction of biodiversity. We have another issue with this, that disconnect between policies between land and sea, and they're very much linked. When we think about the challenges, food challenges, and the increasing population, climate challenges, we usually think about Earth food systems, but we don't pay attention or don't talk that much about uh, maritime food systems, and that is a challenge. But we see there's a direct relation. Agricultural activities on land have an impact on waters, and that impacts also, in turn, the fishing activity, both aquaculture and as wildlife. And it is necessary also to have that nexus between land and sea to observe it as a whole. Another issue, another challenge is inequality, because there's many benefits of blue food for economy, for weather, for food safety regulation, for example, but these benefits are not distributed in an equalitarian manner. They're unequally distributed at a geopolitical level. So not all regions experiment the same level of vulnerability with climate change. We know that tropical coast areas in the tropical areas have more vulnerability, and that also happens at a level of groups. It doesn't impact in the same way all the groups of one population that will have differences in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, age, social status. So those are aspects that are not considered usually. Next slide, please. And here is where, with an alternative that has been used by governments, is solutions based on nature. It's not something new, but now we can see that this helps or can help achieve different objectives for sustainable development. For example, restoring mangroves or several protected areas could improve that potential for carbon capturing and refuges for biodiversity, improving fishing locations. So there are several objectives for development that would be covered at the same time. So here we can see that food safety, which is the second objective, will be covered. Mitigation of climate change, which is 13. Keeping healthy ecosystem, which is 14 also. But something that is very important to consider is equality, and that's not always considered when we think about solutions based on nature. If you only take into account the benefits, that could be many, but if you only take into account and ignore potential costs, potential compensations, you could actually make inequality worse than the global south. And Costa Rica is in this geopolitical area of global south. So the design and implementation of solutions based on nature could impact differently different people within the same community. And that's why we need to take into account and not ignore aspects of representation, rights equality, and how dynamics of power can cross with the use and management of blue foods. And this we can see could change, as I mentioned, in terms of gender or class. Next slide. For this, then we can I'll present some results and information, preliminary information of the process that we're developing in the Gulf of Nicoya as a case study in the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. This is part of a project solving FCP challenges between food, climate, and biodiversity. As I was mentioning, it is a project that's interdisciplinary, and within the University of Costa Rica, we have the School of Geography, SMART, and the Nutrition School. And we also have this is a project that has other case studies at a global level in Africa, in Asia, and in Canada.
It's interdisciplinary because we work with the community, coastal communities. We chose the Gulf of Nicoya because it's very productive and diverse and very important concerning the fishing in Costa Rica. And it also helps us understand the nexus between the earth and the sea. It's very clear we're working in the internal part of the Gulf where there is an very important influence of the river Tempisque. So we can see how it is affected by agricultural activities and how it affects the waters. Since the equipment is interdisciplinary, there's people working with models, climate models, and they are evaluating the quality of water and how it impacts the fishing. And they see the social component, which is the one I am developing, which is to be able to have this information so we can collaborate and find solutions and visions of the few of wanted vision. This would be good in order this information will work to in order to have solutions based on the restoration of the mangroves, because it's a topic where the country and SINAC and the government and the Ministry of Environment and organizations, the ONGs, are working with. And so we wanted to bring information to this topic where security and food security is also we'd also talk about gender. I mentioned this, but in general, one of the objectives is to answer the question how the restoration of mangroves in fishing communities can impact and what benefits can it have in the nexus in earth and the ocean, nutritionally, in the mitigation of climate, evaluate values that are not represented in the decision making, values like economical values, but also be able to talk about cultural values, that intrinsic values that nature also has, and integrate local knowledge and scientific knowledge in order to find solutions in common for climate resilience. We're working in three phases. We're starting with the first one and also in the middle one, and through interviews that we're using in order to analyze perceptions according to the current situation and climate change, uh, food security, local food security, and also be able to see and evaluate process of mangrove restoration and see that type of initiative. Then we started in parallel in Costa de Pájaros. We started workshops for future desirable future. We use histories or stories and chronicles. We create stories with those wishes that we want. In this process in 2027, we will use the scientific of the climate, the production of fishing as information for. We have an evaluation in the first in uh, and we need to see if there will be a change at the end of the process in this sort of parameters. Okay, please go next. As preliminary results, this is a work that we did with women, with a group of birds. What are their desirable futures for the Gulf of Nicoya? We are working with this methodology where we see intrinsic values in the value of nature by itself, nature as culture, blue food, and nature to society. There's values that are utilitarian. Next. For now, the with preliminary results, we can define that there are five results that are considered for eh, eh, every activity based in nature. The first one is that it is gender responsive, that it prioritizes intersectionally the voices that have been margin are not are set apart. In this case, with women, we are working with mollusk recollectors that they are represented in the process. That that they study the incentive, economics, intrinsic, relational, and it's very important because the viability and the success long term is going to depend on the support of the communities, and that is another aspect. And we're advancing to a working with blue food because it's going to help us cover a couple of topics to save the carbon. And this takes us to resilience so that it is facilitated through a potential to do this through and it is very important to recognize the role and of the fishing sector in a small scale in the Gulf of Nicoya. And this to close is quote that talks about the social ecological systems where the humans have an impact, and us as scientifics we have a role in order to, when we do our research, it says when nature is perceived as a network, its vulnerability is also obvious. Everything gets together. If you take one thread, everything is destroyed. Thank you. Thank you very much to Astrid for her presentation. Now we go on with Agustin Gomez Melendez, who participates in the category of governance and sustainability with his two proposals. And the first one is closing the gap between science and politics, the strategies for a blue economy in Costa Rica. I present you Agustin briefly. Agustin is a specialist in statistics and information systems, the professor of the integrated masters in coast. It's a professor of a master in business administration in the UNED and in artificial intelligence and in charge of the observatory development. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's nice to be able to share with you one reflection that I like to bring to this table. It's related to the models of governance, and I'm going to give an example with blue economy to how countries and organizations can understand this dynamic and how we still need thinking at this time to close the gap between scientific knowledge and decision making, and showing this taking into consideration an index that I created with two methodologies to reflect the evolution that Costa Rica has had in development of blue economy in Costa Rica and how we can be short on this concept and because there is still not a lot of information that is in public domain. Generally, when we talk about knowledge or data or political structure, there are also a lot of lack of things. And we can associate that in the oceans to data or climate adaptation and sustainable administration to show two big problems: the costs associated to get all this information in oceans and expeditions to monitor the impact of that process, and associated to that, what is the access to the information that we can have to even be able to process, to map a process, and how we could call it blue economy. And in the middle, we have two big problems: the scientific one, and then we have the user. Let's take out the decision maker at this moment. When we think, and if you want, we can go on to the next one. When we think about administering and in the research, one of the main objectives is to be able to publish and to generate an impact over that information. But the biggest problem we have is how that impact gets to the community, to the fishermen, a group of women that they were presenting now, or to the local actors in that community that get that impact, and what benefit they can have through those processes. So you can see that blue economy is always related to how we can make a more sustainable use and of resources, and how we could be visualizing. Let's go on to the next one: the evolution of one country to accomplish those goals. If to that concept we add problems like overfishing, of administering the fishing, of certifications, excessive pressure, permissions for fishing, and how we manage governance in an exclusive area, or the biggest models of the governance. And if we add the instances of political, national politics, international and national politics that coordinate all the structure of the oceans, we can find big short circuits. And in those short circuits, I'd like to present how we can monitor that, and how we can do that through, if in order to make decision making. We can go on to the next one. Now, so we are found in a concept that has been studied a lot in the land, which is human development. It is worried about seeing how a territory, after some indicators, can improve their conditions, and how we can monitor that throughout time. The United Nations has tried to do finding indicators to make decisions. But what happens when we focus the sustainable development in the ocean, and how we can have different actors according to a focus that is integrated, or trying to mix some things that cannot be mixed. And according to that, where are the research processes, and how we are going to articulate as specialists in an interaction where we are not formed to communicate data with scientific information for a decision maker. Okay, we are formed in a stage that's very low, maybe blue economy. How do you measure it? But if you go to a fishing community where there's needs and lacks and challenges, if you talk about ecosystems or need not to generate overfishing or change the art of fishing to move in country indicators, is not that easy. So, what is proposed through literature? To communicate, to generate platforms and make people aware. How do we communicate? In what terminology do we communicate? Who are we communicating to? How do we communicate as a country? That is not enough. We first have to sign an agreement in order to get to so many emissions, when the reality is there are needs that transcend an agreement. when there's one reality that Costa Rica can only do a part in the emissions, because the problem is not here. It's also in other economic structures that is related to international laws. In the decade of the 70s, when we started, we did strategies that were very innovative. There are theses that they say that it was just a way that we can reposition our country, but we have always given it back to the coast and the oceans. So, in order, since that today becomes a very important topic to make people aware, it's part of a topic in the country that there's this uh, guy who's going to generate this pressure over us. What is this insect? Well, this has been one of the hottest times that we have faced during the last years. And based on that, there's no point of return. So we can go on to the next one. We start analyzing how the awareness and politics should get together, and then we have a doubt, an operational doubt. How do we make this something real and not let it stay in just saying? How are the political policies are helping and telling that they are making a transition into the blue economies, but they're not really staying in the macro, but they can be operational in the micro. And some indicators, as you will see in the few ahead, that the information can be deceiving. Or I could put myself as a country that has done less processes as a blue economy. And administration, I'm talking about 8 years. And we elaborate plans and strategies and promote Costa Rica as a blue economy. And there's an administration right now that blew everything away. Then we start thinking of what is the way that we can have an influence through the political and uh, generally there are phrases or positions when we talk about blue economy, knowledge, administration. There's aspects that we have seen already. I always try to bring into the present, and that's one of the most important aspects in this proposal is how do we quantify this, how we're going to transfer it in a simple way, in a way that it can generate impact in those industries and those organizations that really can generate that change in order to move and do things. That's next. Well, so we can formulate some structures that can help generate these inhibitors. I'm putting some in these two slides that have to do with the importance of oceans. And I always like to do this exercise. Uh, go to a place where you were in your basic education. Who showed you the importance of oceans and the importance of the marine and coastal importance, and or not to take care of the resources? When I was in school, water was always going to be there. Now we're in a different context. If we really want to educate where and make transitions in a country where we can be positioned in different schemes where we are making significant change, we would have to reach or change the whole educational system, because it's not only the topic of oceans. It's not a topic associated specifically to the way that we get educated. It's we're coming in late in the processes where they're teaching us how to educate ourselves, and it also has to do with how we educate ourselves and how do we give this information to educate others. These two examples that I'm going to give you, they have a big trap. They are designed with information, available information from the World Bank, and with information related to Costa Rica and Paris. What is the most important problem? If we measure, how do we measure blue economy? We can find 15 or 10, 15 topics where they ask for very personalized topics like employment, added value to export and imports, good practices in coastal waters. And the big question is, how do we get that data and how do we measure that advancement? So we try to do a sequence of ideas in the models of governance and the lack of data. So if we can have a lot of things that can be quantified. The objectives of sustainable development tell us how to transition from one model to the other and what are the indicators that we have. The problem in each one of those countries is, does this exist? Is it generated in the quality and the enough information that we need to do in order to show the process, other than just the academic information that we can relate to this. So when we talk about water quality or climate change, Astrid showed us an example in the Gulf of a research that is being done. But that does not necessarily tell me or extrapolate to another country, to the whole country, or to even understand if we are in a transition to a blue economy. Okay, next. So, what is it that we try to do? What happens if we manage an optimistic and a negative scenario, and how this could happen? This example is a simulation based on certain assumptions. How we could go from a 90 to a 49 on a pessimistic scenario. How many things could happen? We went through a pandemic, and you know the effect of that. So we have to understand that when we transfer this information from scientific research for decision makers, it's very hard for them to understand these changes. And this sensibility is very hard to transmit because you need to be in a scenarios where you're going to think that there's going to be a bigger disaster in the process. But even with this, we can generate indicators of sustainable fishing, the wildlife areas, contaminants, adaptation measures, and then we have an index of a country. This comes out of international information generated from the World Bank. I can share the methodology and you can make it for your own countries. What is the biggest fact? If we say Costa Rica in 2024 is in 93% of accomplishing those goals for blue economies, people that know the country, would you agree with that? And this comes out of a process that is a research process that we're where we can communicate the information. So what is the topic? So we can have these simulations. There can also be challenges, big challenges, when we contemplate and analyze these tendencies, these trends. For example, there are, yes, let's go to the next one. And this is the behavior we have. And then we say Costa Rica is a 90, or is it in a point 42? What is the country that we want to reflect? And this information has another singularity. Instead of the being an aggregated indicator, it's forced in order to generate one dimension. And so the way that we can start to do research processes, it goes through a lot of to who is doing the investigation or research, and if the information that is presented here can be used for decision making. And this is one of the reflections I invite you to think about. And we could also justify why the curves, why the impact, why the recession, why did the lowering of 2008, the recession for the industry, the real estate industry, that had a big impact. and we can accompany those process calculations with real information. If you want, we can go through the next one. Next. What is the reflection I want to bring to you today? A lot of the discourse of how to generate a scientific research is as if we're in the capacity to respond and measure what we want and to transmit to a decision maker what we would like to transmit. The exercise that I did today was a presentation of how we can quantify something. We can say today Costa Rica is in a 93% of accomplishing its goals to be a blue economy country, or we can say that we are in point 40 with other indicators. What is the biggest problem? That none of those are going to reflect the reality of the country. And none of those positions are in instruments of political policy to measure the accomplishment of the country into a blue economy. That's why it is important to close the gap between the scientific research and decision makers in public policy.
Thank you, Agustin. And continuing with your next proposal of the institutional program for marine coastal integrated. It wasn't cheating when I sent the proposals. I didn't think they would put them one after the other. So it's going to be weird after explaining a little bit the transition of blue economy, talking to about an institutional initiative. Um, so let me know when the presentation is up. Costa Rica, from Article 51 on the fishing law, has a canon that is just related to the tuna fishing, where we destinate certain resources to Universidad Nacional and University of Costa Rica to promote research processes in marine coastal areas. For several years now, there has been an interest on behalf of the administration from the dean's office to be able to strengthen the research processes that are being generated within and with the territories to manage them in a more efficient manner. We're talking a little bit about scientific communication. Well, this is a proposal that we have from University of Costa Rica to be able to manage with the communities and with all the institutions in the ecosystem a strategy and a program that allows to truly strengthen the local actions, and from the strengthening those local actions direct the research programs that are being pushed from the universities. Now, usually universities like the one that I work with, University of Costa Rica and Universidad Estatal Estancias, we sometimes try to teach things that don't have a practical sense of cost and opportunity. And in relation to that practical sense and cost opportunity, we visualize the possibility of managing this program as one of the many possibilities. University of Costa Rica has a series of locations in the coast, one in Golfito, one in Punta Arenas, one in Guanacaste. We have one branch in Limon, and from there we generate different actions, sometimes articulated and sometimes disarticulated, sometimes with participation from the community, sometimes with observation from the community. What this means is we don't do a participatory process that's structured, as we talked about at the beginning, but we do a research process where we literally see them as study subjects, marine life, the fishermen and people, and we don't quantify a real impact of these processes. So what we did from the opportunity of using or directing the way in which we are channeling these resources to be able to create a program, this framework program will try to answer some of the current issues. What is the lack of spaces to analyze, systematize, and organize? Trying to do something that has been titanically impossible in the University of Costa Rica. I think in many of the universities where we have this dichotomies existing, is how to mix research with social action. Social action is understood that process where we would eventually go out to community, do a participation, or have community programs with the university where we approach them, do an intervention, or support in one way or another. And research is seen as the rigorous process where we have to do certain structures, and not that actual social action doesn't have a rigorous process, but it's different realities. The dean's office requested to the development observatory where I work and the research marine research sector to try to break through that structure and try to formulate something where both instances could live together without having one above the other. So when we talk about having a big responsibility of trying to structure this marine coastal research done in the University of Costa Rica, we also had a great challenge of how to truly get to Dean's office talking together. That usually because of their dynamic and they're doing different things and put him in conversation about an impact topic. So this is more or less the institutional answer that we want to allude to. And the idea here is to start with a governance process, and you could say why a model, because we really want to set the basis for all the actors in the ecosystems, in laboratories, in research of the academic units that perform maritime research. We can really sit down to do a common agenda. This led us to sit down with researchers, with the directors of each of the locations, and see who would be willing to participate in this program. And thanks to the effort and the work that we could articulate, we could say today that we have all the locations that they have that are going to align with participating in this. So what do we want to analyze? Now, we have research, we have a need to do research, there's opportunities to research, there's associate partners that would be interested. Usually, requests come very distributed. So until an instance really sits down and analyzes, they can really have a vision of what are the country needs. The program tries to resolve that need through being able to classify which research could support certain decision-making processes and formulation of public policies oriented towards those processes, and also to be able to channel the action that the university does in those spaces. So when we see this, we can identify what are certain projects that we could be developing in relation to conflicts, in relation to evaluating species to a company, in socioeconomical factors, and how could really resolve the true needs of the communities. Let's remember that there's a structural problem in the country, and that has to deal with the way of the economical development that the country has had. Uh, Costa Rica developed from the center of the country, like the metro area, to the periphery that are linking with some of the coast. There was never a development as in other countries from the coast inwards. For different reasons in politics, everything was always centralized in the metro area. So when we try to manage this, we find urban marginal areas or very marginal areas in the coast where we don't necessarily see public policy. They don't see it as something close to them, but they see a problem from the Central Valley. It has nothing to do with them. So, trying to change that world vision within a process that's very large in research accompaniment process is something that challenges the program. Uh, Moving on to the next slide. So, when we see this map, and unfortunately we don't see this when probably when you see it on the website you'll be able to see it better. There's some bullets on information, current information of the country. We could see two great structures. First, all the coasts have a particularity. There's very large asymmetries in investment processes where we have hotel infrastructure of the first world, and next to it we have issues of people that don't even have the minimum income to survive. And in relation to that, the university, at least the challenge of the university is try to generate research that really impacts to improve the quality of life of those people along the territory. Now, what happens? Moving on to the next slide, there's a situation where this is the mission of the program, so you can review it. What we want to transmit is a possibility to articulate and a possibility to collaborate in conjunction. The issue with this is that in the first stages, first put the house in order, and we then go out to invite the rest of the institutions or the rest of the educational ecosystem to try to find joint solutions. What's the main challenge? To harmonize the agendas. And what is the main challenge? To guide the resources that right now are being impacted or could be impacted with a law reform that is in legislative stream, where the main source of financing should be done through mostly in Copesca. Taking into account that in Copesca has certain characteristics that also limit the possibility of doing basic or applied research. So there's not only the need of articulating the entire system at an intern level of the universities, but it also has the challenge of how to do we truly socialize and transmit the program as a tool that could be useful for decision making. So, despite not looking very well, the objectives, or not being able to see them very well, we look for a space of coordination and collaboration, where what we'll do is that be that cog in the system to close that gap between the community and the population and the scientific population. So, and through the research, we can develop in both spaces. We look to socialize, to generate alliances. Maybe a month and a half, we had a meeting with the University of Cantabria to see how we can truly articulate collaboration spaces, how we can generate scholarships. This is not a program that right now we could say it's working 100%. We're hoping to launch in the second semester formally, but this has not limited us in trying to look for spaces in authorization. And with this, we'll start closing. What do we want and have we have tried to evidence with the program? I'll go a cappella on this one. Um, Within the country structure, there's different levels of incidents that you could have. There's the central government, there's the institutions, there's the local government, the municipalities or the intermediate actor, and we have as development associations or that decentralization that could or not can be, or in one way or another, create a strategic alliance. We're proposing that the direct beneficiaries, we see them at a term of a reverse pyramid. So we start with the communities and start building upwards and start to build the agenda, not in relation to what really a politician or a person that perhaps doesn't have the knowledge can formulate about how the management could happen in a community or a coastal territory, but within the projects themselves that come up from the needs of the communities. Let's switch to the next slide. Next one, please. Yeah. So we're seeing a little bit the how do we articulate the citizen participation processes? How do we manage the processes of linkage between the scientific community and the academia and the rest of the community? A lot of focus on what's on dark fund. How can we inside in the local government decision making, taking advantage of the recent changes in the country with the new authorities that are coming into these processes? And we try to summarize this in this pyramid diagram. What we want to do is we want to use the coastal communities as a spearhead to get to ministerial and agencies. And we look to have the dean of the University of Costa Rica, where the offices and locations are that link between 3 and 4. Things that are happening, but that we need to have in common, and how we can have access, systematization, and information that allows us to manage that more efficiently. So, what are we measuring? We want to generate knowledge. We want to create that link, but particularly we want to create a process of incidence on public policies, because we consider that in terms of projection of the projects, we cannot just stay with studying the characteristics, biophysical or chemical or certain species characters that could be very important in terms of scientific research, Uh, there's a lot of merit in that, but it cannot really be helping the fishermen or the fishing community to exit that process. And through this structure, what we're stating is being able to generate and become that bridge. And moving on to the next slide. Okay, I think that was the last slide. And what is the main objective? To be that bridge. That's what we have tried to manage with this. How will we fare? It will be related to how much these transition processes are accepted within the university structure, because breaking that participation frameworks and research frameworks is really difficult, and break those paradigms of researching in a different way is very difficult. So this first years where we're going to be focusing on this program has a lot of convincing to do, really to evidence that we can do things that are of greater impact with the same resources. Thank you very much. Sound test the quality of hardware for you that are in remote broadcasts. So just doing some small audio adjustments now. Turning this talk to the Mareas room, the audio test. And that way we can provide you the audio in the best way possible. Here is on down it. Testing sound 3. Testing sound 1, 2, 3. Testing sound. Testing sound 1, 2, 3. Okay, all set. Thank you very much, and we'll open the space for questions or inquiries. If you agree, you can raise your hand, and I'll provide you a microphone for your intervention. We are missing Clara, but we could touch on the other presentations. Hello, my name is Sebastian, and the question is for Agustin of the last presentation. I also want to do a question to Clara, but she'll be back soon, I hope. Where you showed that pyramid, we had the civil population as number 3 in the pyramid at the bottom. And here we have included the private companies of the private sectors. We have the sectors included. Trying to tie it with what Clara presented at the beginning, how an NGO could do some actions, how a private company also through tourism could create an action. How do we see that insertion of the private sector in this very complex scenario? Because what I was seeing is that creation of the concept, but how to really bring it to a more concrete actions where we can have budget and financing to that. Thank you very much. There's an issue with, maybe not an issue. Let's see this as an opportunity. NGOs do unsurmountable work in managing many of the smaller areas in the country in relation to the contribution, the resources, the directions, even in processing. But we also need to understand that depending on the NGO, they come with a very specific agenda, and that sometimes that specific agenda, and saying this because another process that we have participated in, this could become a perverse incentive for the community itself. In relation to, if they try to resolve a problem, they generate a dependency, and this dependency could be misinterpreted by the communities as a perpetual incentive. So trying to preserve that process, they're going to provide me this incentive and let the issue continue. Put it in this very most extreme case. Now, undoubtedly, the alliances to be able to identify which could be a common agenda or a space where we could articulate our many The main problem that we are seeing, and just mentioning, is resource management. But really, who is the one that would have to facilitate access to resources so we can generate the research that perhaps is not that sexy, but is the needed level. It's not the what's been going to be published in Nature magazine of the new species or the new classification, but it's research that will eventually resolve problems. Undoubtedly, there's a whole governance model, and that's what is the very beginning that I said we will eventually need to develop that and how truly do those interinstitutional agreements and agreements between organizations and the university itself. We've done it in the past with other instances of how to generate agreements to be able to fund a research program. In this case, what we need to do is a little bit more novel because unfortunately, many of those financing options are were eliminated because the countries no longer middle income became a middle income country. So much of the finances went that way. So trying to identify those opportunities here is very something very complex. They're undoubtedly there because they have to be, and they're an important asset within the ecosystem because sometimes those are the ones that move the economy of the community. So knowing how to approach them is part of what we will want to be developing in this period of the next semester. That's more or less how we could answer the question. I wanted to ask Clara, you, it was a little bit quick that presentation. I want to have like a perspective of more anecdotal of how, or what could you say with your, from your personal experience of working with an NGO? What good things does it have? What bad things does it have? Without compromising too much, and also a comparison with a private company or a company that's dedicated to tourism. Thank you very much for the question. I think that in both cases I was very lucky, and I still am, because I'm working with the Morpho company. They gave, give me this freedom of work, and also I'm in both cases associated with the Paris University to my lab. And in both cases, I have the freedom to look for what I see is interesting and go deeper into what I think is pertinent. Obviously, in the case of the NGO, the limitations are funds that are a lot lower because actually in 2018 the NGO existed since less than 2 years. It had existed, so funds were very limited. But afterwards, I did my master's and my doctor's degree with the NGO. But afterwards, I was lucky because of the doctor's degree to have a university scholarship throughout the doctor's degree. So that allowed me to continue with my research beyond. And I'm thinking of the answers while you do the question. In the second case, what I see very different right now is working for a tourism agency. Is that, for example, tours and research spaces are a lot shorter, and there's in very few days I need to have results. But in social science, it doesn't work like that. So you can have results in days. So the greatest challenge for me now is working with an agency where I need to present results in short term, different from how I work when I worked with the NGO, that it was more of a deeper work. So those are the two differences working those tools, but are very interesting also because it's interesting now working with the community that will benefit economically directly after this project of putting dates and in so many days or so many months. We need the project to be ready for the next season, high season. Thank you. I think this is a question both for Agustin as well as the rest of the presenters, because you present initiatives that are resolving certain voids that we have between governance and generating knowledge, were particularly underlined on the presence of universities or research entities external to the government. So at the end of the day, this external from academia are resolving or trying to look for a solution to a problem that the state, maybe in the Costa Rica state or in any other country in Central America or another region, is not able to get to. So, up to what point do universities have to uh, really do those things that the government is not providing? Really taking resources from the universities to continue doing those research. So, knowing that uh, you going all out on this, but it doesn't matter because that's the mission, like Agustin was saying. But at which point do we need to continue working for the solutions? How much do we need to be a government behind the government, for example, to do these things? I'm not sure if that question was clear. Well, since I'm close to answer it first, I think there's a thing with the lack of the central government of being able to evidence or monitor. Someone has to do it. Universities have always characterized for trying to be that counterbalance, not only in terms of main coastal issues, but in multiple topics. Now, if the state works differently, maybe this wouldn't be happening today. So, also structural programs of what is the political agenda that the government in turn has for covering certain topics in prior administrations. Just the creation of the Vice Ministry of Seas could be an indication of what the direction of the country is going. Specifically, if we analyze the national development plans or the national healthcare development policies being generated, or even the strategy, country strategy, there's large gaps in the way in which that is the way that is being managed. So I think this spaces and this leadership has to come from the academical instances that are developing professionals that are immersed within that system. Is it our responsibility? Not necessarily, but I think it's a duty that we need to provide to the universities and the spaces to be able to do that counterbalance, really evidence with scientific knowledge, the decision making, which is something that, unfortunately, at least in this administration, it doesn't seem to be a very clear line of how to justify political decisions with scientific evidence. Thank you, Agustin. Yes, and in regards to the question, I think that from universities we've seen the need, so we've tried to uh, fulfill the need. From the projects, we've been talking more about what interdisciplinary research is, where we can collaborate between different disciplines, but also interdisciplinary, where we have parts involved that are outside of academia. This speaks to researchers as key actors, which is what I mentioned in my presentation, of these issues from society, these issues that we're facing as a society. So, in the classical this vision of research, the subject of research was on one side, and the scientists would take notes, make observations of that system separately from that isolated system. But now we have seen, and it come up, I'm not sure if the responsibility is of the university to fulfill that, but it is an answer of adaptation, an answer to those needs of being able to be an active part of those processes. So if we're active actors of those processes, we're also going to take into account how we design the scientific projects. These projects would include, when we talk about transdisciplinary, it's not only to have participation and we give an interview here or there, or that we have some people participating. It goes beyond that. It's to what degree of participation does there exist in participation of research issues, for example, that Clara mentioned. This is something we have been working on in the university. We have the postgraduate in integrated management of coastal areas that tries to provide that vision to students from the beginning, that it is an issue that's complex, that's systemic, and the role that they could have when they design the research processes, the projects. In the case of this project that we're developing, what are we looking for? Well, the, when we do or make the question, what are the issues of the community, we state the research questions with the same people because it comes from there, that question. And it's not that we try to go and impose from a scientific perspective. We have our own scientific questions that we integrate. We see that co-production of, knowledge as a solution, and also we presented scientific information. Like Agustin was saying, perhaps we're not going to make the change in terms of national policies, but in regards to this specific community, we provide scientific information so they can use it in their decision making in looking for specific solutions that impact that community. So that's how I see how to answer this need. Thank you very much. Any other intervention? Any other comment? Good afternoon. My name is Daniel. I'm curious as a foreigner. I'm used to seeing these gaps where we have the government reaching, or like it's usually civil society that covers those. And academia provides the support and knowledge. I don't know very well in Costa Rica how this civil society is articulated to fill those gaps that the government is not getting to, and the university, it's a public or private, or have the capacity to tackle on. I'm not sure how this is articulated here, and it really caught my attention. Thank you. I think that there was the best way of summarizing it that certain topics are it's very well organized the answer, and in other times it was better organized the fishing sector of the country in terms of the community or the grassroots organization. A lot of what's organized now is more on a productive level, so there's the women that produce or the fishing that work on certain topics, but there's no social webbing in that topic. So a social topic moves more in terms of we have social securities here the census. So we're involved in the social sector. Yeah, I think that's associated to. We recently went through one of the stranger moments where the government announced that they were going to be rationing electricity for a week, and then 2 days afterwards they say no. So that really moves uncertainty because you're impacting the economic model. So there are certain, and that's why I was saying there's certain sectors where perhaps the social knitting is stronger, or perhaps that call that shout is louder and gets farther. So from the experience that we have in coastal areas in the observatory, working with some small coastal communities, they are not able to shout that strongly. Just to look at the day to day of how can we really subsist the next day. And there's a generalized phenomenon that I would imagine happened in all countries. That the pandemic really covered or pushed out social participation in terms of the organization, the way in social media. There's no generation that's not important for them because they don't want to continue with the legacy of their father or mother living from the sea. So I think there's some very interesting things that could be considered in this context, and that's more or less the country situation. There is some, but perhaps you cannot hear them as much as you did before. Thank you very much. Any additional questions to close or continue? Okay, we need to do some technical adjustments, so we're going to take a 1 minute pause while we resolve that, and we'll resume.
whales was one of the ways in which the world was known. If you read Moby Dick, something you don't do that much anymore, you're going to find an interesting book and very strange because it's a sort of a treaty of the hunting of whales. It tells more about more than a novel of adventures. It says that the whole staff were from islands in in different parts of the world. It was a multicultural population, but mostly from islands. It's a boat that finds other boats that are in the same, doing the same thing, that hunting whales and going around the world. Here there's an image of something that was also very wide in the 19th century. It was pictures that try to show the whole world, and this was especially in Nantucket in the Whale House Museum, and it shows the tour around the world in a whale exhibition that measures about 1 kilometer and 3 meters up. And the idea of ocean, what I want to show here is the idea of ocean is possible, the experience, because we go through the ocean if we stop in the way. Because an infinite ocean is impossible to conceive. The next one. The, the next idea is that in that context, the, the, the studies that study the islands, in the terms that the land inhabitants conceive, they let us understand the ocean not by itself, but in a macro perspective. The idea of ocean is associated to the idea of the world. The oceans are elements that compose the world. People have a relationship with the sea, with the shore, with parts of the ocean, and it's good to have a global notion in order to understand its situation or the global situation that is emergency now. But it's also important to place that vision of the ocean of emergency in the concrete experience, and that experience, a strategic spots are in general. We the ones that are not from the islands, yes, there are some that are from islands. We have some ideas of the islands and its people that are very stereotyped, like small places, isolated places, and people that are separated, that are not connected with the world. However, the island societies these days have been protagonists, very important protagonists in the discussions worldwide about climate change, and especially because of the concern of the oceans. 20% of the states are from islands. 10% of the population is from islands. So there's islands all over. And all masses of water have land, and the whole planet could be understood as an island. So I want to invite you to leave your assumptions that are usually within us when we hear the word island.
Okay, and from the perspective of island studies, we have developed a series of concepts to take into account that island or island populations are not restricted to their land territory. They also inhabited the surrounding seas and sometimes even beyond that. Evidently, the island populations got there navigating. Human beings didn't just spawn from islands, but that happened in a continent. But we arrived. The last places that we arrived to were islands. And I'm going to save that expression of Hawafa, which is a Tongan that discussed a lot about island being small places to state a perspective of colonialism that Oceania was a great island continent. It was a vast territory because it was had its orientation and it's oriented to the sea. So you could be very used to islands being small places in the middle of a sea. Really, Oceania is or was a sea of islands, and that's why the title of this presentation. I set this Moana movie here because it's a movie that's well documented. It shows exactly the historic process that's described. I'm not sure if everyone saw it, but it shows exactly the process that's described by Beli Hawafa of how a society that's secluded remembers that they were always a navigating society and starts to, in which it's what happened over the last 30 years in the Pacific Islands. But also put it there because one of the characteristics of the uh, island territories is that they are dominated by a series of imaginaries that are very strong, and we have a hard time to shake off, to be able to get closer to those topics. And I wanted to say, we don't need to. But actually, what we have to do is have consciousness of how, or awareness of how this imaginary that is expressed or condensed in literary products or movies, etc., are operating social processes that we research. They operate in us subjectively, but also operate in the other actors of reality that we are getting close to. Next slide, please. Okay. If the islands are not these small things that are far away and remote and isolated, what are they? Because what's particular in them? And I would say that we need to, if we need to preserve a characteristic element of the islands, I would really take away or highlight the political dimension of the islands, the political dimension in relation to their territory. Island societies are usually face a double challenge. The threat of isolation and abandonment from the political and economical centers, and on the other hand, the threat of invasion that's usually a simultaneous threat. Next slide, please. In that sense, the study subject of insular states has been redefined. It's like the objective dimension of this isolation to emphasize the islandness. So includes all of these elements, these representations that are operating and that make the islands places that are particularly desired. We mentioned a few minutes ago about research that have been done in different parts of the world, but in the case of France, is the in this set of islands, to the extent that these islands have lost their insularity, are more accessible, but more desirable because they have gained in that islandness. And this because the island are have a series of an imaginary, like a syndrome of Morel because of the novel from Adolfo Villas de Casares. Not sure if you've read it. It's an important novel for Latin American literature. It happens in an island where all the protagonists are an expression of a holographic projection that are replacing reality. So this starts replacing the real island. The fictitious island is the one that predominates. 5 minutes, so let's go a little bit further. Next slide. Okay, we're going to see the case of the way in which we created the national park. Yeah, the maritime park of Juan Fernandez, which is a protected maritime area, to see how these elements come into play. We're going to understand these marine park like a way of having fun locality or the community to build their own territory or sea territory. Okay, so here we have a little bit of the Chilean Sea. Has around 43,000 islands. The most well known are the Rapa Nui, Juan Fernandez, in Chiloé that maybe you have heard mentioned. And there's a series of population that's significant. But Chile doesn't have specific policies for insular territory, and sea is not planned. For example, municipalities don't have the capacity to plan a maritime territory. That's not considering the community development plans. Okay, here we have the areas, the protected areas, and we're going to talk about this one here. That's the Juan Fernandez, which is in front of Valparaiso, about 700 kilometers in distance from Valparaiso. It was inhabited at the end of 19th centuries by colonizers. There's no indigenous or pre-Columbian population there, and to date they are lobster fishermen. Next slide. So in 2019, an MPA was created in a marine park of great dimensions that has been positive results in terms of ecology, where we can see that fishermen are actually talking about species that they see again that they used to see very few of, and very far away place, and it's been very successful. And it's also been getting a lot of publicity nationally and internationally as a political tool also of the governments. So how does this come up? From an alliance between an NGO called Oceana and National Geographic Pristine Seas and the local community. And of course, then they took the claim to the state, and in very little time we were able to create an MPA. And this had to deal with the environmental situation, socio-environmental situation. Evidently, the national park is very endemic. 70% of the flora is endemic. And in maritime level also, there's a significant biodiversity. However, it's interesting the fact that the islanders didn't have great ecological concerns, but actually their concern was more on the economical side, we could say, because they had a conflict with industrial fishing that came close to the island to extract different resources with nets. So they destroyed the bottom of the sea, and they provided other resources that they did not extract, but the fishermen did. So it's interesting to see in this case, how the islanders are incorporating the language of conservation. But when you talk with them, you realize that they give it a different sort of sense. So, in terms of the terms that they manage, they're always the same. The fishermen and the communities are capable of elaborating ecological or conservationist indications. The motivations that start coming up a little bit after they start the discussion and they're very interested in and are the ones that have to deal with this park stopping others from coming to fish here, and it gives consistency to a territory in the end, a maritime territory, you could say. So I'm just uh, I'm just about to close, and here it's very important a series of images that are present in all the actors. For example, the treasure, Juan Fernandez as well in the Caribbean. It was a pirate shelter. There's supposedly a hidden treasure, and the metaphor of biodiversity as a national treasure is very strong. The figure or the character of Robinson Crusoe, for example, is something also that brings people from the continent towards the island and generates bridges that allows for the islanders to be able to discuss and seduce the authorities. That's very important in this whole process because in the end the relation between the state and the NGOs and the community is not a relationship between blocks, but between individuals that in the end go there, they take them for a ride, show them the island, they pull out the lobster, offer it to them, and they give them a tail. And here we have all the imaginaries that some are of local origin, or others from cinema, others from literature, and they are mixed in and in a confluence in creating a more imaginary space, but that the always has this character of being exceptional, exclusive, and that should be protected. And this is a value that it's hard to quantify, but it's a resource that the islanders know how to use with masterfully, and that allowed them to also achieve the creation of this MPA. And my last point, there's a typo there, but the legal framework is the last point. An important element, I would say, for the islanders to have gone to all this language of ecology is the fact that there is no other legal framework that protects their territorial rights. So they came to conservation of the environment because they didn't have any other way of doing it, and now they are trying to be recognized as an indigenous or actually a tribal people because that they recognized for the administration for managing MPAs. If they're indigenous people, they have a lot more attributions. They compose the council that administers this territory in a more active manner, so therefore they are in a process of recognition as a tribal people. I had mentioned at the beginning that we don't have indigenous population. They came in the 19th centuries and descendants from colonizers from Chile, Europe, Spain, French, Swiss. However, this paradox is interesting. But with this, I think we have one more slide, the last one. The next slide. As a conclusion, right? From anthropology and the insular studies, it's important to consider these processes of creating MPAs from the perspective of social sense. It's a dimension that's fundamental to take into account to understand how these processes are happening and not to fall into in the mistake of thinking that because the people are using the language that I bring, they think the same way I do. Okay, I think I'm just on time, so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for the participation. We're going to connect one more person that is connecting remotely. While we resolve the technical aspects, I'm going to introduce him to you. Henry Marin Sandoval is from Costa Rica. He's a sociologist with over 12 years working with sectors related to artisanal fishing, from particularly with sports tourism fishing. Over the past years, he's collaborated in local projects that promote development and come closer to coastal communities. Henry participates in the category of ocean that inspires. And the title of the proposal is The Economical Impact of Fishing Tourism and Quality of Life in Coastal Areas in Costa Rica. He's a project and strategy director from FECOP, the Costa Rican Federation for Fishing. And we'll wait for him to connect. Thank you very much for your patience and your active listening. Hello, Henry, and welcome. Can you hear me? If you can hear us, can you please nod? Thank you. He can hear us. Can you speak,
Sí,
please?
les escucho bien. Voy a
Yes, I can hear you, okay?
no de gracias. Parece que la va a poner.
Henry, we can put your presentation here if it's easier for you.
Perfecto, gracias.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, we have 15 minutes available, and I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes to go.
Me avisan cuando la presentación está puesta, por favor.
Let me know when the presentation is ready. Yes, I'll let you know when the presentation is being projected.
Navegando en un mar de islas. No, ¿verdad?
Navegando en un mar de islas se llama.
El impacto económico del turismo de pesca en calidad.
Impacto económico del turismo es.
Ese es,
Sí.
es la siguiente, sí. El impacto económico del turismo de pesca, calidad de vida en zonas costeras.
creo que está en la carpeta 7.
¿Tu presentación está en español?
Es correcto, sí.
Ya va fluyendo. Se está procesando.
Un segundito, ya casi.
Okay, just a second. We're getting there.
Listo, ahí ya la estamos viendo.
All set. We're seeing the
Gracias.
presentation. You can go ahead.
Perfecto. Más bien disculpen por el
Perfect.
atraso.
And actually, sorry for the
Buenas tardes
delay.
a todos y a todas. Mi nombre es
Good
Henry
afternoon,
Marín
everyone. My
Sandoval.
name is Henry
Yo soy
Marin Sandoval.
sociólogo.
I am a sociologist,
Trabajo en temas de
and I work
investigación de
in
pesquerías desde
research
hace más de
of
12
fisheries
o
for
14
12
años.
to 14 years now.
Últimamente, en los últimos
Very
años, he
recently, over
estado
the past
investigando
years, I
todo ese
have
tema de
been
pesca
researching
recreativa. Y pues
recreational
venimos a
fishing,
presentar, o vengo a
and I
presentarle
come
también
to
a todo el mundo
present everyone here
esta investigación,
this
este proceso
research
de
that is in the
producir un
process
paper.
of
Eh,
becoming a white paper.
es una investigación
This
que
is
mide el impacto
research that
económico,
measures the economical,
macroeconómico de la pesca turística y
macroeconomical impact
deportiva
of
y cómo tiene
tourism
pues
fishing and sports
incidencia o
fishing, and how
impactos
this inside
también en
or
la
has
calidad de
impacts
vida
on
de
the
las
quality of
personas
life of the
allá.
coastal areas.
Para dar un contexto más
To give a
grande,
little bit of
la pesca
context,
turística y recreativa
tourism and
alrededor del
recreational
mundo
fishing around the
es
world,
una actividad
it's an
realmente
activity that's
significativa,
really significant,
aportando alrededor de
contributing
190
around
mil millones de dólares
190,000
anuales
million
y
annual
dando
dollars
oportunidades laborales a
and
más de
providing
700
opportunities
millones de
of work for
personas
more than
alrededor
700
del
million
mundo.
people around the world.
Para el caso particular de
For
Costa
the specific
Rica,
case of Costa Rica, this
esta forma o esta dinámica
dynamic or
se
this
trabaja por medio del
is
turismo.
worked
Estamos
through
inmersos
tourism.
en,
We're
la
immersed
dinámica
in
del
the
turismo y el
tourism dynamics, and
90% de esos turistas que
90% of
vienen a
those
nuestro
tourists that come
país
to
a
our
realizar
country
pesca
to
recreativa
perform
son de Estados
recreational fishing
Unidos
are from
y
the United
Canadá,
States and
convirtiéndose
Canada,
entonces en el
becoming
mercado
the
principal
main
para nuestro
market
país,
for our
¿verdad?
country.
Para dar un poquitito de datos también
To provide you
específicos sobre ese
some
mercado
specific data on
turístico,
this tourism
la American
market,
Sport Fishing
the American
Association
Sports
nos
Fishing
dice
Association tells
en sus
us
reportes
in their
anuales
annual reports
que
that
existen alrededor
we
de
have around
52 millones de
52
pescadores
million
en Estados
fishers,
Unidos y particularmente alrededor de 13.8 millones de
fishermen
pescadores de agua
in the United
salada,
States,
quienes
and
son los que
uh,
pues utilizan
the
estos
ones in
recursos
saltwater fishing
marino-costeros
are
cuando
using those
vienen acá a
coastal
Costa Rica a
maritime
pescar de manera
resources when they come to Costa
recreativa.
Rica to
Algo muy
fish recreationally.
importante
Something very
que no puse
important
por acá
that I
es
didn't put
que
here
el
is
grupo de
that
mayor
the group
crecimiento de
with
los
higher
últimos
growth
5
over
años
the
ha
past
sido el
five
grupo de
years
las
has been
mujeres.
the
Y este
women's
grupo,
group.
según American
And this
Sport
group,
Fishing
according to the
Association, ha
American Sports
crecido
Fishing Association,
en
has
un
grown
3 a un
in between
4%
3 to 4%
anual,
each year,
convirtiéndose entonces en un
becoming
mercado interesante
the
también
an interesting
para
market
la
also
pesca
for
turística
tourism
local.
fishing and sports fishing.
Adelante, por favor. Bien,
Okay.
¿cuál es el impacto
What
entonces
is the impact then of this
de esta dinámica turística mundial, particularmente
tourism
de Estados Unidos
activity
y de
worldwide, and
Canadá
particularly US
en
and
nuestro
Canada in our
país?
country?
Adelante. Se conocen algunas cuestiones, algunos
We know
datos en
about
nuestro
some
país.
data points in our country.
Conocemos que
We know
el
that
turismo es
tourism is
aproximadamente el
approximately
8.2%
8.2%
del
of
PIB de Costa Rica
GDP
para
in Costa Rica
este año o el año anterior.
for this or
También
previous year.
conocemos que el
We
turismo
also know
genera
that
alrededor de
tourism generates
150.000
around
empleos y
150,000 employments,
particularmente, y
jobs,
esto
sorry.
es
And
interesante,
this is
la
particularly
pesca
important.
recreativa
Recreational
se da
fishing
mediante
happens
embarcaciones
through
que suman alrededor de
vessels
700
that are
barcos
around
que
more
brinden
than
además
600
alrededor de
ships
2.000
that
empleos
provide more
directos
than 2,000
en
direct
los barcos
employment jobs
específicamente y
in the
además
ships
en toda su cadena de
specifically, and also
valor alrededor de
throughout the value
33.000
chain
empleos
around
directos y indirectos.
33,000
Algunas
direct and
especies
indirect
de
jobs.
importancia para el
Some
sector de pesca turística y deportiva del país
species
pues son el pez vela,
for
marlin y
fishing tourism
atunes y
are
esto fue identificado en una investigación del ICT de hace
marlins,
ya
tuna,
unos años
and
que veremos más adelante. Esto quiere decir que
this
estos
was
700
data
barcos
points
atienden
we had
alrededor de
some from some years ago. So
157.000 turistas
what
que
this means
visitan
is
nuestras
that
costas
around
a
150,000 tourists
pescar de manera
are
recreativa,
attended that
representando
come to our
alrededor del
country,
5%.
representing around
Adelante, por
5%
favor.
of tourism visits
Eh,
to the country.
Sabemos
We know
también un poco más
also a little
sobre
bit
el
more
tema.
about the
Tal
topic.
vez el primer bullet es una
The
apreciación
first
personal
bullet
mía.
is my
Me
personal
parece que los
appreciation.
datos
I
socioeconómicos
think
no
that the
han sido una
socioeconomical
prioridad
data had
en
not been a
ninguna pesquería
priority
en Costa Rica y
in no fishery
particularmente pues la pesca deportiva no ha sido
in Costa
la
Rica, and
diferencia.
sports fishing has not been the
Hay
difference.
3 o 4
There's three or four
eh, documentos
documents,
científicos y técnicos que se
scientific
han
and technical
producido desde
documents
el
that have been
2010 que yo quisiera
produced since
resaltar.
2010 that I
Uno
would
de
like
ellos
to highlight. One
es
of
el de
them
Soto Jiménez
is
del
from Soto
2010.
Jimenez
Este
on
fue producido por el
2010.
Instituto de
This
Investigaciones
was
en Ciencias Económicas
done with the
por la Universidad de Costa Rica y ellos
Economical
utilizando
Sciences
un
Institute for
modelo
Research from the
econométrico,
Universidad
pues
of Costa Rica.
demostraron
And
que
using
para
their
ese
model, they
año la
demonstrated
pesca
that for that
deportiva
year,
fue alrededor
sports
del
fishing
2.13% del
had a value of
PIB. El ICT
2.13%
también
of
ha hecho algunos
GDP.
esfuerzos
Uh,
ligados a la CIMAT, a
there's
la
also
Comisión Interamericana
some
de Marinas y
efforts from the National
a la
Tourism
Comisión
Institute linked to CIMAT,
Interinstitucional de Marinas y
the
Atracaderos,
institution,
y
the
ellos han caracterizado de manera muy
National Commission of
eficiente y efectiva
Dogs, and,
a los turistas
they
que
have
visitan el país. Todo su
done some
perfil
very
pues, social
interesting
y
things
económico de
with
estas personas
the
que vienen al país
profiles
año
of
con año a visitar.
people that
Y
come
pues
to
también
visit
otra
our country.
investigación
And
relevante
another
del tema pues ha
relevant
sido
research
una
on the topic has
realizada
been one
por,
performed
me parece que por la
I think,
universidad,
by
con Moreno
the
Díaz Jiménez
university
Elizondo,
with
quienes
Moreno
identifican
Diaz
pues el
y Jimenez
impacto
Elizondo, who talk
macroeconómico de la
about the
actividad, pero
macroeconomical impact of
en
the
el área
activity, but
circundante
in the surrounding
de
area
el
of
área
the
marina de manejo de la isla del Coco.
maritime
Me parece que
area
también el
of
SINTE
Coco Island.
de la Universidad
I
Nacional
think also Cindy from
recientemente dio unos
Universidad
datos
Nacional
que
also
muestran
provided
un poco
some data
también pues
points
ese
recently that talk a little bit
impacto a
about that
nivel
impact
del
in
domo
terms of
térmico,
the
que es
thermic
algo que
dome,
me parece que es
something
necesario.
that I think it's
Adelante, por favor.
relevant to mention.
Pues ya conociendo
And
esto,
knowing all
nuestra
this,
investigación
our
lo que quiso responder
research, what it
fueron dos
wanted to
preguntas
respond
básicas.
was two
¿Cuál era
basic
este
questions.
impacto,
What was this
verdad,
impact?
tan general, tan
So
macro?
general, so
Pues la
macro,
calidad de vida de las poblaciones
and
costeras.
the
eh,
populations in the
y
coastal
también pues
area,
refrescar un
and
poco
also
ese
to go
impacto
over a little bit about that
a la fecha en la que se realizó la
impact on at the
investigación.
time we
Para la
had the
primera
research done. For the
pregunta, lo
first
que
question,
utilizamos fue un modelo
what
cuantitativo de
we
calidad
used
de
is
vida
a quality of
basado en
life
una
quantitative
encuesta
model based on a
combinado
survey
con un enfoque de
combined
capital de
with a
los capitales
focus of
comunitarios.
community capital.
Y para la segunda,
And
para
for the
refrescar un
second
poco
one,
esos datos,
to
utilizamos
talk about
una
those
metodología
topics, we
que se
used a
basó en calcular
methodology
el
based
costo de
on
viaje y
calculating the
de
cost of
cómo pues
travel
esos
and seeing
valores
how this
afectaban la
values
economía
impacted the
nacional.
national
Adelante.
economy.
Bueno, básicamente la primera
And basically,
pregunta,
the
¿verdad? ¿Cómo
first
impactaban
question of
a
how
la calidad de
they
vida
impacted the
estos
quality of
factores?
life, these factors
Seguimos
we resolved,
enfocándonos en el marco
focusing
conceptual de
on
capitales
the
comunitarios, que de manera rápida
concept
pues son
framework
esos
of
medios de vida,
community models, which are
esas
these
actividades que
means
cada
of
uno y cada
living,
una
these
realiza
activities that each one
en su
performs
cotidiano
in
vivir
their
para
day
suplir
to day
sus necesidades.
to fulfill their needs.
Existen dos
We
categorías
have two
principales
main categories
índices para
about
medir esto,
indexes
uno
to
subjetivo y
measure
otro
this. One is
objetivo. El
subjective and the
subjetivo es
other
algo que uno
objective. The
reporta
subjective one is
de cómo me siento,
something
cómo
you report, how
percibo,
do I feel, how
y
I
el
perceive,
objetivo es algo
and the
que
objective
pues
is something
crean
that
los países
the countries
con
create with
estadísticas de salud,
statistics
de
in
educación,
healthcare,
acceso
education,
a
access
servicios
to
de esta índole. Pero entonces
services. In
en
this
esta investigación utilizamos un modelo
research, we used
combinado
a
en el que
combined
usamos
model,
tanto lo subjetivo
both
como lo objetivo. Adelante, por favor.
objective and subjective.
Hay seis capitales que
And we
tomamos a
have six
considerar
capitals that
dentro
we
de
took
esta
into consideration within
primera
this
pregunta.
first
El
question.
capital construido, el capital
The
financiero, el político, el
built
social, el
capital,
humano, el
political,
cultural y el
social,
natural.
human, cultural,
Y
and
todo eso
natural.
pues
And
interrelacionado
this is all
y una
interrelated
dinámica,
in a
pues es lo que
dynamic,
crea esa,
which is
esa
what
seguridad
creates
y esa
this
calidad de vida que las personas
security and this
perciben
quality of
o que
life that people
tienen
perceive or that they
objetivamente
have
pues, en su
objectively in
vida
their
diaria.
lives.
Adelante. Para
For
definir y para
or to
recolectar
define
la
and to
información
gather
necesaria
the necessary
para la
information to
investigación,
do the
usamos
research,
una encuesta
we
estructurada para recopilar
created a
datos a nivel
structured
individual.
survey
Nuestra
to
población de
gather
interés la
individual
definimos
data.
como las personas que
Our
trabajaban
population of
en
interest we
embarcaciones en
defined
aquel
as people that
momento,
worked
y
in
para ese momento
ships at that
estimamos que
point,
eran
and we
alrededor de
estimated around
500. Al final
1,500
terminamos
people at that
realizando
point.
las 304
We did in the end a total of 304
y
interviews
definimos lugares
and
geográficos
defined
de relevancia para
geographical
la actividad, los
locations of
cuales quedaron
relevance for
como
them,
Quepos, Jiménez,
which were
Golfito, Tamarindo,
Quepos, Puerto
Potrero,
Jiménez, Golfito,
Playa del
Tamarindo,
Coco
Potrero,
y
Playa del
Herradura.
Coco, and
La
Herradura.
aplicación de la entrevista fue
The
mixta,
interview
tanto
was
presencial
done
como
mixed, both
por
face to
teléfono,
face
y
as by
acá
phone.
un dato importante es
And
que
an important point here is that
la encuesta era un
the
poco,
survey was a
diría yo,
little
grosera,
bit,
era bastante larga,
I would say rude. It was
pero
very
tuvimos
long,
que hacer trabajo
but we
previo
had to
con
do
líderes
some
para que
previous work with
sensibilizaran
leaders
a la
to
población y
sensitize the
tuvieran mejor
population,
disposición
and
a
they
la
were
hora de
more willing
contestar
when they
pues,
responded to the
Utilizamos
questionnaire.
escalas
We
básicamente.
used
En
scales,
algún momento
basically.
utilizamos escalas del
At
uno al
one point,
10.
we used scales
Nos dieron
from 1 to
resultado de manera
10 that
adecuada
didn't
cuando hicimos
resolve adequately when
puntaje de la
we
prueba.
do the piloting and the testing.
Entonces tuvimos que
So we had to
modificar a una escala
modify
un poco
to
más corta
a shorter scale
del 0 al 4
of
para
0 to
medir todos
4
los
to measure
componentes
all the
que estaban
components that were
nuestra prueba.
in the survey.
En la parte macro, para
In the
calcular
macro
la parte
portion,
de ese impacto
and
pues,
looking at
nacional, como
this
les
national
mencioné
impact, as I
anteriormente,
mentioned
lo que realizamos
previously,
fue
what we did was
el costo de viaje y
cost of
utilizamos
travel, and
información
we used
secundaria que ya se había
secondary
construido
information that had
por el
already been
ICT o
created
por algunas
by
otras
the
instituciones
National
del país,
Tourism
como número de
Institute or other
turistas, distribución
institutions in the country,
de gasto de los
like
turistas
the
en el
distribution of
país,
expenses of the
gastos de mantenimiento de
tourists
las embarcaciones.
in the
También
country,
revisamos bases de datos
expenses in
relacionadas a
maintenance for the ships,
cantidad de
and
embarcaciones con
also
licencia para ese
looking at the
momento.
number of ships
Y
with a
pues
license
combinando
at
esta
that point, and
información
combining this
logramos
information,
obtener
we were able to obtain
algunos resultados
some
generales
general
del protocolo.
results,
Y determinamos que
and
el
we
impacto
determined that
macro
the macro
o
impact
el ingreso
or the
de,
income of
de, de dinero al país por este concepto y combinando
to
esas
the
piezas de
country
información
because of
daba
this
alrededor de
concept
500 y 520 millones de
were
dólares
around
por año,
500 and 520 million dollars per
representando
year,
para ese
representing
momento
by that
alrededor
point
del 14%
around
del ingreso
14%
total
of the
generado por
total
el
income
turismo
generated
nacional.
by national
Algo
tourism.
interesante fue
Something
que
interesting was that
definimos que no
we
todo el
defined that
ingreso
not all the
se quedaba en el sector
income
turística y
remained in the
deportiva,
tourism
sino que
in
también
the
se
sector of
compartía con,
Nos quedan
sports
cinco
fishing,
minutos.
and we
se
have 5
compartía
minutes
gracias con otros sectores como el sector de
and with
transporte y
other
sector
sectors like
hospitalario.
transportation and hospitality
En cuanto al
sectors.
resultado modelo de
In
vida,
terms of
para la parte
results in
subjetiva,
quality of life for the
como les
subjective portion,
comenté,
as I
esto
mentioned,
es una
this is
expresión de la
an
percepción de las
expression of the
personas
perception
en
of people in
relación a
relation
ese
to
momento de su vida
that
y pues
point in time
logramos
in their lives,
determinar
and we
que la
determined
calidad
that
de vida
the quality of life,
autopercibida pues era alta.
self-perceived,
En
was
una
high.
escala de 0 al 4,
On scale of
pues
0 to
todas las
4,
respuestas
all the
están
answers were
de las personas consultadas
of the
estuvieron
people
por
that
encima
we
de los 3
asked were
puntos.
above
Adelante.
3 points.
Otros
Go ahead.
resultados generales
Other
también nos
general
mostraron
results also showed that
temas relacionados a ingreso nos
in
muestran
relations to
que
income that
en
show
comparación
that in
las
comparison
personas que trabajan
the
en pesca
people that
turística y
work in
deportiva
sports
tienen
and
mejores
recreational
ingresos
fishing
y hasta
have
un
better income
45%
and up to
más que una persona
45%
que
more than a
trabaja
person that
en
works
turismo
in
y
tourism.
pues evidentemente un
And
poco
evidently there
más
was
a una persona
more for a
que obtiene
person
pues, el
that
salario
has
mínimo.
the minimum wage.
Adelante. Existen bajos niveles de
There's
educación
low level of
formal
formal
en el
education
sector,
in the
pero
sector,
notamos que había
but we
una alta
noticed that there
especialización
was
por
a
parte de las
high
técnicas,
specialization in technical
veremos esto un
capacities,
poquito más
and
adelante.
we will look at this
Hay una baja
further on.
participación también
There's
de
low
manera general,
participation in general
solamente el
terms. Only
18% de las
18%
personas
of
que
people
responden
that
la encuesta,
answered
pues,
the
están
survey
afiliadas a
were affiliated to
alguna forma de
some
organización o
sort of
espacio para toma de
organization
decisiones.
or decision-making space.
Encontramos muy baja
We
participación de
found very
mujeres
little
en el
participation
sector.
of women in the
Solamente
sector.
hubo un caso
Only
de una mujer
one case
trabajando como
of a
marinera
woman
en las embarcaciones y
working
también
in a
pues, se
ship, and
reportó
also
un aumento
there was a report
en la
of an
participación
increase in
de
the
las personas
participation
jóvenes
of young
en
people
el sector.
in the sector.
Ahora,
And
les voy
now
a presentar tres
I'm going to present
resultados
3
del
results
modelo
of the
de calidad
model
de vida que se
of quality
aplicó.
of life that was
Adelante, por
applied,
favor. En donde logramos
where we
encontrar
are able to find
relaciones significativas
significant relations
en tres
in
ejes.
3
Uno es
axes.
infraestructura y calidad de
One,
vida,
infrastructure and
en
quality
donde
of life,
existía
where we
infraestructura,
had
las
infrastructure.
personas tendían
People tended
a
to
mencionar que su calidad de
mention that
vida
their quality
pues,
of
era
life
más
was
alta,
higher
pues, que era mejor,
and that it was better.
¿verdad? Siguiente.
Next slide.
Y también
And
en el
also
tema de
in
capacitación y
terms
calidad
of
de vida, se
training and
recuerdan que
quality
les
of life,
mencioné
as you
que
remember, I
la evaluación
mentioned
formal
that
estaba un poco baja,
formal
pero
development was low,
la
but
capacitación técnica
technical
pues, aquí
training
jugó un papel
here had
importante,
a significant
en
role,
donde las personas que
where
tienen
people that
una
have
capacitación técnica, ya fuera por el
a
INA
technical training
o
being
algún ente
either
especializado en
by
pesca deportiva,
National Institute of
contribuyó
Learning
pues,
or another
significativamente
specialized
a
entity,
la,
contributed
a la
significantly to
percepción
the
de que su calidad de
perception
vida
that their
pues,
quality
era
of
mejor.
life was
Y
better.
finalmente,
And finally,
siguiente. Determinamos también
we
que
determined also
la
that
percepción
the perception
de la
of
disponibilidad de los
the
recursos
availability of
afectaba la
resources
percepción de
impacted the
calidad de
perception
vida.
of
¿Y
quality
qué
of
quiero
life.
decir con esto?
What do I mean
Que
by
si
this?
las
That
personas
if people
manifestaban sentir que habían menos
manifested
recursos
that they felt that
disponibles
there were
para
less
ser
resources
utilizados,
available to be used.
me quedé sin luz.
I lost power here, but
La calidad de vida también tendía
quality
a
of life also tended
bajar.
to be
De
reduced.
forma contraria también,
On the
cuando las
contrary, also,
personas
when people
mencionaban que había
mentioned that there
recursos
were
disponibles
available
en el mar
resources
como vela, mar,
at the
no
sea
atún para
as
ser utilizados, pues
shellfish,
la calidad de
tuna, or
vida
marlin,
tendría
then
a
the quality
ser
of life
percibida como
tended to be
más
perceived
alta,
as
¿verdad?
higher.
Entonces esto lo que lo que nos
So
mostró
what this
era que
showed us
existía una
was that
relación
there
entre
was
la
a
percepción de la
relationship between
disminución o
the
el aumento de
perception
estas
of the
especies y el
reduction or the
detrimento o el
reduction of the
aumento
species
de
and
la
the
calidad de vida pues, de
increase
las
or reduction
personas
in the quality of
encuestadas.
life of
Ya
the
con
people
esto,
surveyed.
les
And
dejo a
with
ustedes
this,
más
I'll
bien
leave you.
si tienen
If you have
consultas
any
o preguntas
questions
y
or
les agradezco
inquiries,
por el
and
tiempo
I
y de
appreciate your
nuevo
time. And again,
disculpas por el
I
atraso inicial.
apologize for the initial delay.
Muchísimas gracias, Henry,
Thank you
por
very much, Henry,
también tu aporte
for your
y
contribution also
la
and
presentación
the
muy
presentation.
interesante.
Very interesting.
Abrimos el espacio
We'll open the
para
space for
consultas o comentarios de
inquiries
las
or
personas
comments
presentes.
from people present.
Bueno, de momento no tenemos comentarios.
Right now, we
o
don't have any
consultas.
comments or questions.
Okay. Igual de todas formas, si quieren profundizar en el
If you
documento,
want
hay una
to go deeply
versión
into the document, there's a
como un
version
reporte
like a
técnico
technical
en nuestra
report
página web.
in
Ahí
our
pueden ver un poco
webpage,
más los datos a
so you
detalle.
can see more of the data in detail.
Yo quisiera retomar una de las consultas del
I
bloque
like
anterior,
to take one
y
of
la
the
consulta
questions
era,
from the last block when the
¿cómo
question
se
was,
articula la
how do
creación de
you
políticas
articulate the
concretas
policies,
en temas
concrete
ya
policies in the
abordados
topic
desde el
of the
científico?
oceans from the scientific point of view?
No sé si quieres arrancar
I
vos,
don't know if
Henry,
you
y
want to
después
start, Henry,
Guillermo,
and then
y después
Guillermo,
vos. ¿Qué tal?
and then you.
¿Podría repetir otra vez?
Can you repeat, please?
Sí,
Yes.
la creación
The creation,
¿Me escuchas? Sí.
Te escucho, sí, sí.
Perfecto, ajá. ¿Cómo se contribuye a la creación de
how,
acciones políticas concretas en
uh,
el
pol-
tema
how
de los
to
mares
contribute
desde el
to,
quehacer académico?
from the academic point of view, how to
Bueno,
contribute to
como
public
les expliqué
policies
en un
of the
slide que propuse
oceans.
en una reunión en
I put
particular,
an
en
appreciation of
donde
mine
igual
in
no le
particular
pusimos
where I value
prioridad
that there
al
is
gasto
no
socioeconómico de
priority
las
to the
pesquerías.
socio-economical
Me parece que la parte
indicators.
social
I
y
think the
económica
social
pues
and
tiene una
economical
relación
part
directa
have
con lo
a
que se pone
direct
en el mar.
relationship with what you're putting in
Yo creo que
the
es una
ocean.
manifestación,
It's a
por
manifestation,
ejemplo, de la
for
calidad de vida de las
example, of the
personas
quality
en
of
ambos lados.
life of
En el
people.
caso de la pesca
In the
turística, por
case
ejemplo,
of
con el turismo de
fishing
pesca liberal,
specifically,
eh, me parece que eso nos da
I
pistas
think that gives us clues
de cómo concretamente
to
nuestra
how
sociedad con
concretely
recursos
our
naturales, como por
society,
ejemplo el
like
vela o el
with
atún
a
como marlin,
natural
se
resource like
manifiestan
the tuna,
en la vida de las personas y las
can be
familias, ya sea
manifested
en
in the
forma de
life of
ingreso
people
o
and
en
the
forma de
families in the
acceso
form
a
of income
X
or income
servicio
or
en sus
access to a
comunidades.
service to different communities.
Muy bien, gracias.
Okay, thank you.
Bueno, yo, ante esa pregunta, creo que
Well, to that question, I would say it's important to distinguish I don't remember the person who made that question, but when the civil society is more active or less active,
a veces cuando la sociedad
sometimes when the civil society is less active,
desde la academia se tiende
from the academy,
los procesos
we push the processes even more, but according to our own definitions. But I think there are epistemologic problems there. It's easier when the civil society has a more active role and is more clear about its objectives because the role of the academy in that case is closer, and the role of the academy can be more associated to the production of data, but especially to the reflexive character of the categories that we are looking out for. I'm looking for the consequences that have these types of interventions, like to go back to the case that you had been showing, for example, the ecological consequences of the marine park are positive. The economical consequences of the fishing and tourism are good, but there are other consequences that I wouldn't like to qualify as positive or negative, but that are expected and that are important because in the culture, from a cultural point of view, the community changes and it starts changing in a way that is more standard. They start to accomplish some standards that are expected by definition, by legal definition. For example, norms and framework. If they want to be indigenous town, or they have to find a language or rituals that they don't have. So it's a whole social movement associated to the definition of certain categories that did not correspond to the process that they were doing. If there was a tool to ensure or facilitate the definition of more control over the territory, we wouldn't have that effect of secondary effect, let's call it that way. So I think in that scenario, so it's easier to accompany those processes in not as much as it was at some point to be the voice of those who don't have a voice. They always had it. That I think that there's difficulties, but mostly now we have a academic voice or scientific voice that can put in the discussion, be at service to answer that question. El tema político, en nuestro caso, en la creación de las áreas protegidas en Francia, es una pregunta compleja porque el área protegida puede ser creada por diferentes instituciones de gobierno, regionales, departamentales o locales. O el nivel de la ciudad. Así que dependiendo de qué nivel es más o menos difícil lidiar con esas políticas y lidiar con las locales casi siempre es más fácil. Y hemos tenido suerte en Nice en que la persona a cargo de la creación del área protegida está involucrada. Ella tiene mucha esperanza en la creación de esa área protegida e insiste en que los científicos van a estar involucrados en el proceso de la creación. Así que eso fue relativamente fácil, pero varias veces, especialmente en el pasado, sería tal vez un poco más difícil para los políticos de imponer sus reglas, pero ha sido, y en algunos casos los políticos han creado un área protegida sin que no funciona en su ciudad solo por decir que tuvieron un área protegida, y eso casi siempre falla en términos de preservar la biodiversidad.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anybody has a comment or a question. If not, then thank you for the time, the attention, the listening, especially to the people who have presented the presentations that accompanied all the way to the end. It's been productive and diverse, and it gives us enough information to offer the scientific committee And from there, we make a final document. Thank you very much in my name. Marcela Villalobos, Andrea Mora, who is also here from the Vice Rectory of Research. And we finish this table. Thank you very much. Esto lo apagamos nosotros o ellos vienen. Sí. ¿Vos estás todos los días?
Todos los días es hasta las 5.
Bueno, sí, igual, sí. Pero es que todos tienen menos después o van a venir otras personas también.
No sé.
Porque esta semana bueno, yo estoy allá en el otro lado también. Sí.